Megan had always been the kind of woman who wore compassion like a badge, always helping someone, always putting others first. So when she told me her old college friend Nina was in the middle of a brutal move across town, I didn't question it. I even offered to help. "You know, I've got the truck," I said casually. "I could load the heavy stuff, no problem." But Megan's smile tightened ever so slightly. No, it's just emotional support. Boxes, light lifting, girl stuff." She brushed off my suggestion with a kiss on the cheek and a reassuring squeeze of my hand. "Besides, she's embarrassed. She's going through a breakup and doesn't want to be around strangers." It made sense. Megan had always been a deeply empathetic person, but something about the way she over-explained that morning stuck with me. She began packing 2 days before she was supposed to go, folding clothes carefully into her overnight duffel, slipping a silk robe into the side pocket, stuffing in makeup and jewelry I hadn't seen her wear since our anniversary last fall. I watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. "You taking the whole closet to move a few boxes?" I joked, trying to keep my voice light. She laughed, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "You know how I am. I like to be prepared. What if we go out afterward? Or if Nina needs to blow off steam?" I nodded, but something shifted in my chest. The next morning she left before the sun rose. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, her careful way of easing the door shut behind her like she didn't want to wake me. But I was already wide awake, staring at the ceiling in the quiet pre-dawn gloom. I waited until noon. Gave her the benefit of the doubt maybe she really was just helping a friend. But that lingering feeling, that barely there itch of doubt, kept scratching at the back of my mind. I finally gave in and opened the location-sharing app we'd set up years ago, back when Maria was a teenager and Megan had insisted we all be able to find each other in case of emergency. It pinged, not downtown, not even close. She was hours away, at a lakeside cabin we'd rented once for our anniversary, nestled among the pines, where the cell signal barely reached and the silence wrapped around you like a blanket. I sat there, phone in my hand, heart pounding like a war drum. No moving trucks, no cardboard boxes, just an idyllic hideaway, far from prying eyes. The lie wasn't in what she said, it was in what she didn't. That was the moment I knew. Not hoped, not feared. No, she wasn't helping a friend move, she was moving on without me. The sun had barely cleared the treetops when I turned the key in the ignition and started the long drive. I wasn't sure what I was going to do once I got there. I just knew I had to see it with my own eyes. I didn't call, didn't text. I didn't want a warning. I didn't want another lie wrapped in a soft voice and framed by a half-smile. The further I drove, the more the landscape changed. The city gave way to back roads, trees closed in like sentinels guarding secrets. I remembered that cabin, how we'd once watched the stars from the porch swing, how she'd told me that was the first time she felt completely at peace. I used to think that was a memory we both held sacred, but now it seemed she'd gone back there for something else, or rather, someone. The GPS showed her still there. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. As I pulled off the gravel road and came to a slow stop at the edge of the clearing, I turned off the engine and sat for a minute, the silence screaming louder than any words could. The cabin stood just ahead, warm, rustic, surrounded by pine and lake mist. The driveway was empty, aside from a black SUV. It wasn't Megan's car. I stepped out quietly, heart pounding. The chill in the air couldn't touch the fire that had begun burning in my chest. The cabin's blinds weren't fully drawn. I moved carefully around the side, keeping to the tree line, until I found a narrow angle through the window. My breath caught. There she was, curled up on the couch, not in workout leggings or casual moving clothes, but in a soft, oversized sweater I didn't recognize. Her hair was down. Her face was relaxed, even glowing. She was laughing at something he had said. There was no mistaking it. Colin. The man I'd seen once before at a mutual friend's get-together. The one Megan had insisted was just an old friend from work. I'd felt a strange energy back then, but I hadn't pursued it. I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. He was sitting close, too close for two people with nothing to hide. His hand was on her leg, casual, familiar, like it had been there 1,000 times before, and when he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, she didn't flinch or hesitate. She tilted her head, smiled, and kissed him. That was when my breath finally escaped. Not as a gasp or shout, but as something far worse. A long, slow exhale. The kind you let out when a truth you tried to deny finally settles its weight on your chest. I could have barged in, could have made a scene, but something inside me snapped into focus. Clarity. I wasn't here to yell or grovel or demand explanations. I was here to see. And now that I had, there was only one thing left to do. I stepped back from the window, made my way around the front, and walked up the steps. Each one sounded louder than the last. I raised my hand and knocked. The sound startled them through the half-open blinds. I saw Megan jerk upright and Colin leaned forward instinctively, eyes narrowing toward the door. She moved to open it, probably expecting a neighbor or delivery. When she pulled the door open and saw me standing there, her smile collapsed so fast it was as if her entire face had lost structure. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted to Colin, then back to me. I didn't yell. I didn't ask questions. I just looked at her and said, quietly but clearly, "So this is who needed your help." Behind her, Colin rose to his feet. His body language shifted, no longer relaxed. He didn't say a word either. He just stood there, suddenly aware that this fantasy retreat was built on borrowed time. Megan stepped out slightly as if to block my view, but it was too late. I'd seen everything I needed to see. I turned without waiting for a response. She called after me, "Alex, wait!" But I kept walking. My voice was calm, low, and even, but there was no mistaking its finality. "Don't. Not now. Not here." As I made my way back to the car, the gravity of the moment hit her, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew the image of me walking away would haunt her longer than any words could. By the time I started the engine and pulled out of that gravel driveway, the first domino had already tipped. Her story, the one she so carefully stacked and rehearsed, had just been cracked wide open. And now she had no idea how quickly it would all come crashing down. The drive back home was quiet, but not peaceful. The engine hummed beneath me like a low, judgmental voice I couldn't silence. Every curve of the road, every flicker of sunlight through the trees, only deepened the contrast between what I'd believed and what I now knew. I wasn't angry in the way people expect you to be when they hear your partner's been unfaithful. I wasn't screaming inside. I wasn't shaking with rage. It was something far worse. An eerie, unshakable calm that came only when a storm had passed through and taken everything with it. The next day, I didn't say anything to Megan. I didn't need to. Not yet. She came home that evening like nothing had happened. Said traffic was bad, that she was exhausted from lifting boxes and talking her friend through a meltdown. I just nodded, poured her a glass of wine, and asked if she wanted to order Thai or cook. She chose Thai. Said she was too worn out to stand over a stove. I watched her from across the table as she scrolled on her phone and laughed quietly at something on Instagram, like we were still us. But there was a sliver in her smile now. Something thin and fragile, as though she knew she had stepped out of the story she'd built and wasn't sure how to step back in. I let it sit for a few days. Not out of fear, out of strategy. People are most vulnerable when they think they've gotten away with something. And Megan had that glow, that post-lie arrogance that comes from thinking you've dodged the last bullet. When the weekend came, I invited her family over for dinner. Her sister Claire, her brother-in-law Martin, and her cousin Naomi. Megan was surprised but pleased, eager to impress. She lit candles, wore the blue dress I always liked, and pretended to be the perfect wife. Maybe she even convinced herself that she was. I cooked ribeye, made her favorite mashed garlic potatoes, poured generous servings of Cabernet. We smiled, we laughed, we looked like a couple worth envying. But just before dessert I cleared my throat and stood up. "I've got something I want to say," I began, my voice clear and composed. Everyone looked up from their plates. Megan smiled, curious. "I want to thank Megan for being such a dedicated, selfless person. The way she supports her friends, driving out of town, staying overnight, helping with emotional breakdowns. It's honestly inspiring. I turned slightly to look at her. "You went all the way out to that lake cabin last weekend, didn't you?" Her smile faltered. Just for a second. "Yeah. Like I said, Nina needed—" "Funny," I interrupted, still smiling, "because when I checked your location, it didn't ping anywhere near Nina's apartment. It pinged at a cabin near Forest Lake, the same one we used to rent for anniversaries. But I guess that wasn't a moving truck outside, just Colin's SUV." The silence was deafening, her face drained of color. Claire put her fork down slowly, eyes widening. Martin shifted in his seat, looking between us. Naomi stared, unblinking. Megan tried to speak. "Alex, can we maybe—" I raised a hand. "No, we're not going to do this privately. You lied to me. You built a narrative and sold it to everyone here. You used words like help and support and emergency, and all along you were building your escape route." Claire's voice was the first to break the silence. "Wait, Megan, you lied?" Megan's hands trembled as she reached for her wine. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" I asked, my tone still measured, but icier now. "Just far enough to make me the fool? Or far enough to hope no one would ever notice? Colin hadn't just stolen my wife. He'd taken the truth from our marriage and replaced it with theater. And Megan, she had rehearsed her part so well, I might have given her an award if it hadn't been my life unraveling behind the curtain. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "No," I said, calmly but firmly. "You were going to get caught. There's a difference." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the gallery, opened the photos I'd taken from the cabin window, the one where they were hugging, another with Colin kissing her temple, and placed the screen on the table in front of her. Gasps echoed around the room. Naomi looked away. Claire muttered something about needing air and stepped outside. Megan didn't touch the phone. Her hands were now folded tightly in her lap, eyes wet, lip trembling. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, voice cracking. "I want what's mine back," I said. "My peace, my dignity. And you can keep the lies. Stack them as high as you want. Just know they'll fall. Every last one." I turned and walked to the kitchen. Behind me I heard sobs. Not from me. Not anymore. That night I messaged our friends, our extended family, even her colleagues, who'd always admired her integrity. I told the truth, not with malice, not with rage, but with the clarity betrayal demands. I included the photos, the dates, the messages she'd sent. She didn't just betray me, she violated the story we told others, the image we shared. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about exposing the fiction. By the next morning, the calls started coming in. People were stunned. Some were angry. Most were disappointed. Megan's carefully crafted persona of empathy and strength dissolved in a matter of hours. Her foundation, built on half-truths and borrowed time, had cracked beyond repair. I didn't have to destroy her. She did that herself. All I did was shine a light on the pieces as they fell. After the dinner, there was no pretending anymore. Megan didn't sleep in our bedroom that night. She stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket like it could protect her from the cold reality closing in around her. I heard her crying softly sometime around 3 a.m, but I didn't get up. There was nothing left to say. Sympathy was no longer mine to offer. By morning, the news had already begun to spread. The family group chat was buzzing, but not in the cheerful way it once did when someone shared a birthday photo or a vacation update. This time, it was a wave of awkward silences and half-hearted questions. Her cousin messaged, "Meg, is it true?" Her brother, "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Her closest friend, Julia, whom she'd confided in for years, simply wrote, "I can't defend this." Megan barely touched her phone. It vibrated constantly on the kitchen counter, lighting up with name after name, each one likely a piece of her old life trying to understand what the hell had just happened. But when you pull out one lie from a carefully stacked tower of deceptions, the whole structure begins to collapse faster than you expect. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel in her isolation. But I wasn't going to rescue her either. Not this time. In the days that followed, I resumed my routine. Work in the mornings, gym in the evenings. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months, people I'd slowly distanced myself from to be more available at home, more present in a marriage that turned out to be hollow from the inside out. Funny how the betrayal didn't just cost me a partner, it nearly cost me myself. Megan, on the other hand, started shrinking. Her movements became slower, more measured. She avoided eye contact. She barely spoke unless necessary. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was so faint I had to lean in just to hear her. "I didn't think it would fall apart like this," she said one night, her eyes rimmed red. I didn't respond, because what was there to say? That I'd warned her in my silence, that lies don't dissolve, they detonate? She added, "I thought Colin would be there for me." Ah, there it was, the part she hadn't yet admitted out loud, the part where she realized her fantasy was built on quicksand. Because Colin, that rugged charmer who made her feel wild and seen, had vanished the moment the truth was no longer a secret. He hadn't returned her calls, hadn't responded to her desperate messages, hadn't stood by her when the fallout began. That perhaps was the cruelest lesson for her. Not that she'd been caught, but that she'd been discarded. In hindsight, it made sense. Colin wasn't looking for a life partner. He wanted a distraction, a secret, something thrilling. And once the secret became public, the thrill was gone. All that remained was the mess. And Megan, standing in the middle of it, holding the broken pieces of her own story. Her work called eventually, not to fire her, but to ask that she take some time off. Clients had started asking questions. A few had seen the post I'd shared on my private account, discreet but direct, factual but clear. I never named her. I didn't have to. People figured it out on their own. She packed a small suitcase and moved in with her sister for a while. Claire didn't say much to me, just a polite nod when Megan came to gather her things. I let them take whatever they needed. I wasn't interested in claiming territory. I'd already claimed back something far more valuable, my self-respect. In the weeks that followed, the silence in the house changed. At first it was hollow and heavy, like something was missing. But then, as the dust settled, it became peaceful. I started playing music again while cooking. I repainted the guest room. I even opened the windows more often, something Megan always said let in too much noise. Strangely, I slept better, not because I was over it, but because the worst had already happened, and I'd survived it with my dignity intact. Megan sent a letter about a month later, a real one, handwritten in the kind of looping cursive she used on birthday cards. It was an apology, of course, but not a plea. She didn't ask to come back. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just admitted it. All of it. How she'd been feeling lost. How Colin had seemed like an answer. How the guilt didn't hit her until she saw me standing at the cabin door and realized what she'd destroyed could never be rebuilt. She said she didn't expect a response and didn't deserve one, but wanted me to know that I had always been the calm in the storm, a phrase she once used lovingly, now echoing with irony. I never wrote back. Some stories don't need an epilogue. Some endings write themselves. The silence that followed Megan's departure wasn't empty. It was restorative. For the first time in years, I wasn't tiptoeing around unspoken tension or wondering whether affection was real or rehearsed. The house felt different now. Not colder, not lonelier, just honest. It carried a stillness that let me breathe again. I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking for a distraction or someone to fill the space Megan left behind. I took time to get reacquainted with myself, the version of me that used to exist before everything became compromise and suspicion. I returned to early morning hikes, started volunteering at a local mentorship group. I reconnected with my nephew over fishing trips and caught up with a few friends I hadn't seen since before Megan started retreating emotionally. My days were fuller, but not in a chaotic way, in a purposeful one. Meanwhile, Megan's life began to crumble in more visible ways. Colin never returned. Not just from the relationship, but from the entire mess. Word spread that he took a new job out of state, left quietly, like a man avoiding the fallout he helped create. Megan was left with unanswered texts, unread messages, and the sharp realization that she had gambled everything for someone who never planned to stay. Her social circle narrowed too. Friends she once leaned on pulled away, not out of malice, but out of discomfort. People don't like being lied to, even peripherally, and Megan's version of events unraveled so quickly that even her excuses had no shelter to hide behind. She became something no one wants to be, a cautionary tale whispered about at brunch tables and back offices. But I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. Her destruction wasn't my goal. Truth was. And the truth had a way of doing its own damage. Legally, we separated without a drawn-out battle. She didn't fight me on the terms. Maybe guilt got the better of her, or maybe she realized that nothing she could claim in court would restore what she'd already lost. I let her keep the car and a portion of the joint savings, not out of kindness, but because I was done. Holding on to money felt pointless when I'd already let go of something far heavier. I've come to understand that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming your narrative, owning your experience instead of letting it own you. I'll always remember that morning when she walked out, suitcase in hand, eyes lowered as if she could disappear behind her regret. And I'll always remember how good it felt to not chase her. Now, months later, I'm standing on the deck of that same cabin, not to mourn what happened, but to reclaim the space. I rented it for myself this time. No lies, no secrets, just coffee, a journal, and the sound of wind threading through the trees. It's strange how a place that once held betrayal can feel like peace again when you return on your own terms. I don't think Megan ever really wanted a new life. I think she wanted to feel wanted. She mistook fleeting passion for freedom, but in the process she traded something stable, something sacred, for an illusion. And illusions, by their nature, can't stand the weight of real consequences. As for me, I walk lighter now. I trust slower, but I live louder. I laugh without the need to second-guess why, and when people ask if I've moved on, I don't say yes or no. I just tell them I've moved forward, because in the end, I didn't lose everything. I found clarity. I found peace. And, most importantly, I found myself. Waiting patiently on the other side of the lie,